Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I am your host, Whitney Sewell. I hope you have gained a lot from the past few shows, just about hiring and bringing in an assistant or somebody else on your team in the ways that we have done that successfully recently. I recently read a ton, just many books about hiring and how to hire properly, thinking through that process in great detail, which I've shared with you over the last few shows, numerous shows now, and also through the main book that I'm giving credit to is the book Topgrading by Bradford D. Smart. I would encourage you again to have that on your shelf, as a reference. Maybe, like I said in the last show, you go through it one time, read it. It's on Audible as well. But have it on your shelf just to reference as you hire again in the future, and as you have different questions about that process. It's been very helpful to me and our team. And so if you go back, if you listen to show 800 and then started there talking about hiring, that for Class A talent, and then also went to 850 where I talked about the job description for that talent, and then 857 we talked about the questionnaire. I think that is one of the most important parts of this entire process, is that questionnaire. I went through tons of the questions that are on our questionnaire that we use, and I would encourage you to modify that and make it for your position or add and take things off. But it's so in depth, and it allows people to stand out that are coming into your organization before you ever have to get to the interview, right? I do not want to have to interview 25, 30 people, and like I shared in the last episode where we went through the interview process, talking about a tandem interview and how to do that to some extent. It could take 2 to 4 hours, and the 4 people that we interviewed out of many hundreds, many hundred candidates. We interviewed 4 people, and so when you first heard about a interview process taking up to 4 hours, I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe it, but I was thankful when we got to that point that I had spent the time ahead of time to narrow that way down, because it did. We spent every bit of 2 hours and sometimes 3 with most candidates, and we did not get to all the questions. And so it did take us that long. We could have easily spent 4 hours. And I would encourage you to be open-minded about that time length, because of the value of hiring the right person, or just the loss of hiring the incorrect person for this job role. And just the time that it's going to take you to find somebody else again, to retrain somebody else, all those things. It's so worthwhile to spend the time now. Take the time it takes, and it takes less time. You've heard me say that numerous times. But take the time it takes, and it takes less time. But then we went to show 864, and that, like I said, was specifically about tandem interviewing and thinking through who that other person is that's with you in the interview, kind of with the business, or maybe a close friend that's another entrepreneur, or somebody that has that other skill sets maybe that you do not have, or maybe they're even really strong in skill sets that you're hiring for. And so they're helping you to see these things about this individual. Again, I wanted to stress thinking about this person's character. And I wanted to stress thinking through how this person became who they are. And I even talk about that so I get the question all the time from passive investors: how do we, learn to passively invest? How do we know who to invest with? And it's a great question, and you have to do tons of research, right, about that sponsor. And I encourage, I say all the time, I encourage them, you want to know this person's character. And it goes the same with hiring. You want to know how they became who they are. And it's often, as you are a sponsor, or maybe you're new into this business, or maybe you're a passive investor, but it's often why I share my story with lots of people about how I was in the military, how I received Soldier of the Year while I was in Iraq for a year, and how I, was a state trooper, and how, there was 1,200 applicants and I was one of 5 that was selected. And so, and even then became a federal agent. All those things, I hope anyway, speak to my character, speak to, what none of these things that I accomplished were easy. And so I want people to see, hey, he's willing to do what it takes, right, to make it happen. He would not have been hired by all these places or done these things, if it wasn't for just a very high standard, and work ethic. And so, that's the things that I'm wanting to look for in a candidate. That's why we're asking all these questions. That's why you have to go through many steps to find the right person. So many say, I don't want to do that because, you teach them all these things and then they quit or whatever. And then I have to do it all over again. Well, that is right. Oftentimes you're going to hire numerous people. You're going to go through, somebody's going to quit, things come up, they take a different position. It happens. But guess what? Your next one, you're going to be so much better qualified and ready to hire even a better candidate the next time. You're going to understand working with someone so much better. You are just going to be better at being a supervisor, and you're going to be ready, more prepared for a next level of candidate as well. So the sooner you start, the better, even if it's not, somebody that's going to stay with you, for 10 years or for a full career. The sooner that you get started, the better, because you are going to learn so much. And so go through those, about the tandem interview. And then today I want to focus on just the interview itself. And the questions that we use, there are so many ways and thoughts about how to conduct this interview. I'm going through how we conducted this interview and how it was successful. Again, a lot of this, or almost all of it, is from that book, Topgrading. And I would encourage you to look at that book and have it in your, in your office for hiring. So, all right to it. The interview itself. Remember, you and your partner, your business partner, whoever this is that it's conducting this tandem interview with you, you have reviewed the candidate's resume and cover sheet and questionnaire and reviewed, the tasks that you asked them to do. I've talked about that a few times in the last few shows, where you have called them and you've said, hey, I need you to, do these things. I have a task for you and I'd like to have it completed by tomorrow. And you've reviewed those things. So I personally printed all that out, had it on my desk, made notes, circled, wrote things all over them. So that way I would know to ask that individual about these things. But also, it helps me to think through, especially during the interview or after, to look at those quickly before we get off the call, or Zoom call in this case, and ensure that there wasn't anything that was conflicting information, right? That I needed to clarify or ask them about that didn't come up during the interview. So, I printed those things out, and my business partner and I both had reviewed those things. You want to ensure that you're both very familiar with those things. And again, we didn't go into tons of detail about the individuals ahead of time because I didn't want to create a bias for my business partner either. I wanted him to create that for himself. And so think through that. But then afterwards, obviously, we compared notes and talked through, each individual pros, cons, who we thought was the best fit. And so now, now you've reached out to those people, you've received their work back, those tasks, you've determined, okay, I think it was about a dozen people that completed those tasks for us. And I narrowed it down to 4 that we were going to interview. So now, yes, I responded to every person and said, I'm sorry, you were not selected at this time. Obviously we're keeping, we told them we're keeping their information on file in case we, are hiring again for this position soon. We will reconsider them or reach back out at that point. But these last 4, I did reach out and schedule an interview, right? I called them up and said, I'd like you're moving on to the next stage in this process. And now, we would like to conduct a formal interview and schedule a time. And I told them up front to expect, at least 2 hours, right? And again, early on, I did not expect it to really take that long. Okay. But since the Topgrading book said 4 hours, I thought, okay, I'll allow at least 2, but I was wrong. It would take every bit of 4 hours if we went through every one of these questions. And so that probably tells you I will not be able to go through every one of these questions during the show, but I will give you many of them and to help you to think through how to conduct this interview. So right off the bat, we're conducting this interview in chronological order. And so we're thinking through everything they've provided already, the questionnaire, which is also in chronological order. We're thinking through, depending on their age and their work experience. We're thinking through even high school stuff, depending if they're very young, and they do not have much work experience. But if they do, then we're probably starting with college and moving forward, right? And we're going to talk through pros, cons, all those things, and even supervisors and things they like, dislike. But just know ahead of time, you got to review their information ahead of time. So you know who this person is. They're going to know, if you have done your homework or not. Do your homework, right? Do your homework on this individual. Obviously, look them up on social media, figure out who they are, right? How did they become the person that they are? I've talked about it numerous times. It's so important. How, where did their character come from? How was it built? Who was their influences, in their life? Go through, and just ensure you have the proper questions, right? So tandem interview, you're going to let this person know, all of a sudden you're on the screen with them, or maybe you're in person, but in our case, on Zoom. Let them know, about, the length of this interview. Obviously it's going to take, many or a few hours, right? Let them know. And so we may chit chat for just a few minutes and talk about where they live, or talk about just anything. You want to build a little rapport, right? And you want to just calm their nerves. You may be nervous as well. And oftentimes, if I'm nervous about speaking, at a large event or in front of thousands of people, as soon as I get up on stage, once I may be nervous beforehand, but as soon as I say a word, like just a couple words, I'm like, I'm fine. I am good then. But it's getting to that point. And this interview could be the same way for you or the interviewee. Just don't forget that. And just to help relieve some of that stress, and just talk about whatever, right? You may know about the school that they went to, and you may have a connection there, or the ball team there, or something else just outside of the interview, and just to break the ice a little bit. But you don't want to spend a ton of time there, because you do have a lot to get through. So right off the bat, and I'm just going to share with them, and I may say something like this, and I have this written out so that way I can really just read it. And it's going to help you too. If you are nervous about interviewing, it's just going to help you to have some of this stuff written out. And I'm going to say, is so that I can get a good feel for your background, and first your education and then your work experience. Let's briefly go back to your college days and come forward chronologically, up to the present. Then we'll talk about your plans and goals for the future. And so, that's a very easy way to just get right into it very softly, and just so they understand that that's what you're doing. We're thinking through this very strategically. There's nothing random about this interview. So, obviously, you've looked through their questionnaire, all those things, and you're going to ask about them. You're going to talk about maybe the college they went to, and you're going to ask them to expand on the information right off the bat. May just say something like, I see you attended this college. Would you just expand on the information you provided? Give me a brief rundown of your college years. Any particular events that may have affected your career decisions. And we'd be interested in knowing about your work experience, and what school was like, and what you were like back then, the curriculum, activities, how you did school, highs, lows, points, and so forth. And then, and I may leave that open there, right? I just said a lot, but I just want to see how they respond. All right. See what are the highlights to them? What's the first things that they talk about? And then I may, obviously I'm going to be taking tons of notes, but I'm going to say, give us a feel for what kind of school it was. Was it large, small, urban, rural, and just what your college years were like. Ask them what their major was. And did they change? Did they change their major? Okay. What were school activities that you took part in? And this will give you some information into, were they very active? Were they outgoing? What were those things that they were a part of? It can tell you a lot. But what kind of grades did they receive? And again, this is not if they had really low grades, especially in high school, but even in college to some extent, it may not be a true reflection of how they're going to perform in this task or this career that you have for them. And so just remember that it could be but remember that you're learning, you're putting all these pieces together, and as a whole, it's not just like this one thing is going to knock them out most of the time. There may be something like that for you, but for us, for the most part, it was the whole picture, right? You were going to take all these notes, And then at the end, we're going to, piece all this together and figure out if this is the correct individual for this task or this job that we have. So I'm going to ask them also what people or events during college might have had an influence on your career. So important, and leave it open. What do they talk about? Are there events or, that are people, who was that person? Was it a professor or teacher, or was it, a friend, a classmate, even a classmate's parent or your parent or their parent or whatever, who had that influence and why, and how was that, were they influenced? Were there any class offices, awards, honors, or special achievements during your college years? So yeah, that's just going to tell you a lot too about their drive and their work ethic. What were high points during your college years? And again, we want to be looking for like leadership, right? Or resourcefulness, or anything like that that just shows more about who they are. What were low points or the least enjoyable occurrences during those college years? Again, that's not a deal breaker, if they had some major low points, but I tell you what, just if they do share some low points, I think they can share a lot about just their honesty as well with you, but obviously you'll have to interpret that. So I'm going to ask them give us a feel for any jobs held during college. So important. What were those jobs? How hard did they work? Did they work during the summer, or were they just partying the whole time? It's just going to share a lot. Where did they spend their time? What was important to them? And, it's just going to have many indications there, about who they are, and, just resourcefulness, motivation, all those things that's going to tell you or help you to think through. Then you may go into graduate school, many of the same questions, high points, low points, work experience, all those things. But why did they attend the school that they attended? And why did they pursue the degree that they attended? Why? What was their plan? And I bet their plan at that point wasn't to work for you. It may have been, but I doubt it. So what was their plan then? Work experiences, were they working during that time as well? But then we're going to go right into the work history, especially, if they've had numerous jobs. There's many things that we need to know. And you might just start, by explaining to them, and just, right up front. And now we would like you to tell us about your work history. There's lots of things that we would like to know about each position. And so you may just jump right into it, right? But and then you're going to let them know that they're going to have a chance to share. They're going to have a chance to ask questions. They're going to have a chance to ask about the requirements and more in depth things like that. But that may be later on down the road, or in the interview. I mean, so you're going to ask them, what was the name of the employer, the location, the dates of employment, all that stuff. Hopefully you already have all that on the questionnaire. But some of that you may need to clarify. Maybe they didn't complete, what the revenue or what their income levels were, for some of those positions. And I wouldn't be afraid to ask. And so and I know sometimes that can be a question that people don't want to answer, right? Or an employer doesn't, they may not want to ask, or they may not feel comfortable asking somebody how much money they made, but you're fixing to employ them. I think you need to know. And I think that says a little bit about them, whether they'll share or not. And maybe they ask, well, is there a reason why you need to know that? Well, I mean, I'm going to share. I want to make sure we're competitive. I want to make sure we're paying you enough, for this new position, or that we can even afford you. Maybe you may expect a lot more than what we can afford to pay. So just making sure, before we get way in depth, much further into this, that we can even afford to pay you what you're worth, and where you're at in your skill set right now. And just know up front, we always plan to pay more as we go and give bonuses, those things. But we want to ensure that we understand, where you're at, as far as your expectation of salary and things. So I do not think it's out of the ordinary or unexpected to ask those questions. So you might ask them, as we're going through different jobs, we're going to ask them, what was their title? What was their expectations, responsibilities, accountabilities? What did they do? What were they accountable for? Who were they accountable to? Successes, accomplishments, how they achieved them, failures, mistakes, why? What would they do differently? Or most enjoyable moments, least enjoyable moments, or things that they had to do. And then just think about, what talents did they have or have to express during that position? to be successful at whatever they did. We're going to ask about their supervisor. What was their supervisor's strengths and weak points? I think that's an interesting thought when you're asking this individual about their supervisor at this position. And you're saying, what was that supervisor's strengths and weak points or weaknesses? And just letting them talk, right? And maybe ask them to go a little more in depth, or just rate the supervisor's overall performance, because you're going to start to see patterns, right? And especially if they've had many jobs, we're going to ask that about their first job, right? And their second job or their third job, depending on how long they've been in the workforce or how many jobs they've had, of course. But we want to get to understand strengths and weaknesses that they saw or think, about their different supervisors, because ultimately, depending on what those are, it could be the same thing they're going to think about you. But it's just important to see those patterns. So we're going to talk about plans and goals for the future. You're going to ask them, you're going to say, let's discuss what you are looking for in your next job, right? What are you looking for? Leave it open. Okay. And then what are other job possibilities? How do you feel about each one? And just allow them to talk and let them describe their ideal position and what makes it ideal. I want to know that. I want to know what their ideal position would look like. And that's going to help you to see, is this something that I can even provide to this individual? They may seem extremely qualified, but if they're not happy, they're not going to be there long term. And you and them both are wasting a lot of time, especially if you hire them. So even if they seem extremely qualified, just remember they need to want to be there. And so, just want to think through, is this the ideal position for them long term? You want to do the right thing by them just as much as yourself, if not more so. So how does this opportunity square, with your ideal position? Ask them. Hopefully they've done research and they understand the position. They've, looked at your website. They've read everything about the job description. They understand what they're going to be doing. Ask them, how does this opportunity square up with your ideal position that they just told you about, right? It's just a great way to get them to think and provide some insight to you of what they're thinking about the specific position. So what do you view as opportunities and advantages, as well as risks and disadvantages in joining us? And then be specific. If they're not specific, ask them about advantages or disadvantages. Could you go more in depth on those advantages or maybe those disadvantages that you're thinking about? So we're going to do some self-appraisal stuff. Let them rate their strengths and weaknesses. We're going to jump into tons of just intelligent questions and skills questions and different things about, we may say, describe a complex situation which you had to learn a lot quickly. Right? How did you go about learning? How successful were the outcomes? Please describe your problem analysis skills and just leave it open. Please describe these things, right? And see what they say. Do people generally regard you as one who diligently pursues every detail, or do you tend to be more of a broad brush type? And why? And just let them answer. So again, I won't have time to go through every question that we ask. We're about out of time, unfortunately, again, and maybe I'll go through another show, or I just keep stretching this out, but it's so important because I've seen it work for us. And I know it's working for many, many other groups as well. And it's so important that you hire the right person. So I think it's important that we go through some of these questions, and you'll get some of them today. And I think some of them next week as well. But, what tools do they use to make decisions, or what type of approach do they have? And, even going into just judgment, decision making, what are a couple of the most difficult, challenging decisions you have made recently? I mean, you're really making this person think, right? Before looking at a lot of these questions, I would not have thought to ask them these questions, but it's going to bring out lots of things that you can follow up about. And it's going to allow you to learn more about this person, remember, and their character. So what are a couple of the best and worst decisions you have made in the past year? So, and even things like, what maxims do you live by? Like, do they have anything like that in mind? So creativity, we want to know, how creative are you? What are the best examples of your creativity in processes, systems, methods, products, structure, services, all kinds of things you could ask about? Or do you consider yourself a better visionary or implementer, and why? I think it's a big question. It's important. Even my business partner and I, we've had discussions early on, and even we still have discussions about who's the visionary, who's the implementer, and ensuring that we're thinking through those things as far as what project we're trying to complete. How far have we thought through those things to understand who's what complementary skills are we using here, to best perform and complete this project, whatever it may be. So I want to understand, what this person believes they are, visionary or implementer, and why. So in the past year, what specifically have you done in order to remain knowledgeable about the competitive environment, market, and trade dynamics, products? I mean, this could be lots of things, but patterns of consumer behavior, if that's it for them, whatever business or job they're coming out of, what have they done to remain knowledgeable? I think it's important. I myself, I always have to be reading, and I know that, and it has proven to be so valuable. Just to always be reading. Every morning I'm reading. I'm always looking for books, that help entrepreneurs, or just the mindset, and keep me sharp and help me to better educate myself. It's so important, and I want to make sure that this person is thinking like that as well. Right? It could be in a different way. It could be a different thing that they're interested in. That's fine. But are they somebody that's always trying to become more knowledgeable? Are they always trying to educate themselves? Please describe your experience in the strategic planning, including successful and unsuccessful approaches. Where do you predict that your industry or competitors, depending on where they're coming out of, is going in the next 3 years? And think through how they answer those things. Do you let's see, yeah, risk taking. What are the biggest risks you have taken in recent years? And it's just neat to hear how they answer some of those things. Most of the time, they are not going to expect these questions. They're not going to expect questions like that in most interviews. Even if they've been studying in how to interview, they're not going to be expecting. And I'm not trying to just throw them. I'm not trying to completely throw them off guard, but I am trying to get some honest answers and not rehearsed answers. I know when I was becoming a police officer, I read many, many books about how to get hired and how to interview. I mean, from the suit that I was wearing to how I sat in the chair to how I addressed them, how I looked at them, with eye contact and shook their hand and answered their questions and thought through hundreds and hundreds of questions that I could be asked. Right? I spent lots of time ensuring that I was as prepared as possible for those interviews. It was intense. I was very nervous. I was very young. And I remember sitting, I'll never forget this one interview, and I want to share this story because maybe this will help you in interviewing as well. But I applied for probably a half a dozen different police departments. I wanted to get hired by state police, but if I didn't, I knew it would be a good segue into state police if I got hired by another agency and worked there a year or two, and then would segue into state police. Thankfully, I did not have to do that. But there was one interview that I'll never forget, and there was probably 7 or 9, I can't remember, it was an odd number, that people in this room, and they were sitting like a horseshoe like table, right? And in the open part of that horseshoe, if you can imagine that, in the opening, they had a chair for me to sit. And so, for whoever they're interviewing, and then all these people sitting around this. And so, that's one way to make your candidate very uncomfortable, obviously, because there's that many people for one, and they're all asking questions, and you're not sitting behind anything. And so that's it helps somebody to be more comfortable if they're sitting behind a desk, right? Or they have something in front of them. They can move their hands or their feet a little more without everyone seeing those things. But in this position, they obviously, as a police officer, they want to know a lot about you, and they need to know a lot about you. But I was very prepared. I sat down, and I was sitting obviously straight up in my seat, and they were going around asking questions, and we were about done. And I'll never forget this lady on the end. We get to her, and it's her turn to ask a question, and she asks me this hypothetical question: what if this happens? What if you enter this house and there's a man and woman and they're fighting? It was that kind of scenario. What are you going to do? And I gave a response, and she slapped the table. She stood up and slapped the table at the same time, and just really tried to pressure me. Well, what are you going to do? Why would you do that? And I gave another response, and I just stayed as cool and calm as I could, and just gave a response. And I'll never forget that. But she was really pressuring me just to see how I would respond. Obviously you're already very nervous, and so that was a technique that they used at that time to judge different people's response. How calm did you stay, during that response, those things. So not that you should do that for this individual, definitely not if it's an assistant or somebody that you're bringing onto your team, most likely in your real estate business. But tons of different interviewing skills and techniques that you can bring into this. I'm going to do another show on some more questions about this interview process that you definitely need to go through, and so you can have the best interview possible and hire class A talent. So have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.